And good afternoon, folks, and welcome to this EPA Alumni Association Academy presentation. I'm Walter Mugden. I'm an association board member, and I'm co-chair of the Academy program. And it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Kenny, who was just recently elected as the association's president. And Tom's going to say a few words before we get started. Tom?
Well, I just wanted to introduce myself. I was a regional attorney in Region 5 in Chicago from 1987 to 2023. And I have the honor of now being the EPA Alumni Association president. I want to first thank Dave Ulrich for his tenure as president. I have big shoes to fill, but one of the things we hope to do is to enhance our engagement with the association's membership. And so if you have ideas on that score, do not hesitate to contact me or any of the other board members. And we're open to your ideas. With that, turn it back to Walter to have the show go on.
Thanks so much, Tom, and it's great to have you in the president's chair. So, folks, today's program is titled Restore and Protect. And you're going to hear about two very inspiring stories of ecological rejuvenation. So we're getting some good news today, which is very, very much needed. And here to introduce the speakers for the first of these two stories is Dave Ulrich. As you heard, it's Tom Kenny's immediate predecessor as Alumni Association president, and also my longtime good friend and colleague. Dave?
Thank you very much, Walter, and thank you, Tom, for your kind words. I only wear a size 10 and a half, and I'm confident that you can fill those shoes very easily. Well, it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce Dr. David Warners and Dr. Gail Hefner to tell us about a very, I consider, revolutionary approach to the kind of work that we've been doing all of our careers called reconciliation in a Michigan watershed. And, we did a lot of work with TMDLs and NPDES and BAT and BPT and all of those types of things. But the word reconciliation never entered our vocabulary. And when I heard David speak and Gail, I was just fascinated by their approach to restoration. A lot of R's here: rejuvenation, restoration, reconciliation. So Dr. Warners and Dr. Hefner founded something called the Plaster Creek Stewards. Now, Plaster Creek isn't a terribly appealing name for a river. There's a reason that creek has that name that you'll hear a little bit about and what ideas there are for the future. But it's fascinating what they have done and are doing and will do in this watershed. Dr. Warners is a professor of biology and director of the Plaster Creek Stewards at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He has his PhD in botany, ecology, and evolutionary biology from the University of Michigan. Dr. Hefner is professor emeriti from Calvin University as well, and co-founder of the Plaster Creek Stewards. And very important, if anything, from Michigan, that you have some balance between Michigan and Michigan State. And we brought that balance here. So with no further ado, I will go back to you, Walter, for the introduction of our other speaker.
Thank you, Dave. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for the second part of our program. Tony David is director of the Environment Division for the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. His division manages, protects, and restores the natural resources of the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne with a whole group of professionals in the fields of air and water quality, fisheries, hazardous waste remediation, forest resources, solid waste management, and more. It's a terrific group of professionals. In 2017, Tony received EPA's prestigious Environmental Champion Award for his work to remove the Hogansburg Dam. And that's the extraordinary project about which you're going to hear from him today. Tony is also a member on the U.S. section of the International Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board, which regulates outflows from Lake Ontario. And he's a member of the New York chapter of the American Fisheries Society. So you'll hear from Tony David later, but now let's go over to Gail and Dave for part one of our program. And I think
There we
you're going to
go.
try and load up your PowerPoint if you can do that.
Mhm. Let's see.
We're working on it here. You gotta get it.
Screen.
We did test it beforehand, so we know it's going to work.
Yeah.
There you
just-
go.
Hey, there we go. Oh,
Now you got to
How
go
about
to a
that?
different screen. There
There
you
we
come.
go.
All right, good.
Is it working now?
It is indeed.
Great.
Hmm.
Well, Dave and I are really glad to be with you all today, and we're going to tell you a story of discovery, lament, and the beginnings of reconciliation. The book that we wrote is really an invitation to reimagine a different future than the one most of us are currently pursuing. Maybe not people that are associated with EPA, but the general society is pursuing a direction that is not necessarily bringing healing and hope to the land. From the very beginning of this work, Dave and I knew that we needed to take a multidisciplinary approach to this work. Dave from a physical science perspective and me from a social science perspective. So about 20 years ago, we began to hear about contaminated water in West Michigan, and over time we discovered our ignorance. This phrase, discovered ignorance, is a phrase used by Clint Smith in his powerful book, How the Word is Passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America, in which he, as a Black man, is surprised to discover truths that have existed for a long time, but he had not known about. And he wonders, how can this be? Dave and I gravitated to this phrase, discovered ignorance, because it fits what we came to discover about our place, where we live and work. That surprised us and shocked us and caused us to pay attention in new and fresh ways and take notice. What do we do with this discovered ignorance, this new knowledge that demands a response? So today I'm going to mention 4 aspects to our discovered ignorance. There's many more I could talk about, but I was just going to mention 4 of them. The first one is we learned that the watershed where our university exists drains to a creek that is considered the most contaminated waterway in West Michigan. As you all know, a watershed is an area of land that drains to a common point, and the creek is called Plaster Creek, but we discovered that the indigenous name was Kenosha, meaning water of the walleye. Today, there are no walleye able to survive in Plaster Creek. The second aspect of our discovered ignorance is that the degradation in this watershed is relatively recent in the long history and life story of this creek, happening only in the last 150 to 200 years. And third, most of its problems are invisible to us. Plaster Creek, like many urban streams, has been buried underground in storm drains, so most people don't even think about its existence. And there has been virtually no connection between people upstream and people downstream. And we rarely think about how people living upstream impact the people living downstream. So those are the 4 aspects of discovered ignorance we're going to talk about. I think one of our hopes is if we can get people to begin thinking about upstream, downstream, that will make a big difference in the way we treat our water. So learning about these surprising problems in our area compelled us to respond in some way. And because we're a university, we decided to focus our efforts in 3 areas: education, research, and restoration. And we began to learn, and as we began to learn the history of our place, we initiated a formal oral history project to listen to community voices, hearing from long-term residents who told us fascinating stories of what Plaster Creek was like when they first encountered it years ago. I'm just going to read you a short paragraph from the book that I think sort of explains what the power of this. We conducted more than 85 formal oral history interviews with residents of all ages within the watershed. These conversation partners have informed the telling of this story. Mothers and fathers, grandparents and children, teachers and pastors, government officials and community organizers, the powerful and the marginalized, tell the history of their relationship with this creek. These interviews have helped us better understand who has been harmed by the creek's presence over time and who has been blessed by the creek's presence over time. When you study history, for history to inform us, accuracy is important. Biases in the telling of history are unavoidable, because typically the voices of those in power are the most heated. Ya Jesse, in her stunning novel Homegoing, makes this important point. When you study history, you must always ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed so that this voice could come forth? Once you have figured that out, you must then find that story too. From there, you begin to get a clearer yet still imperfect picture. One of our conversation partners summarized the problems within our watershed in one sentence, and this, or in couple sentences, this one quote. We have tremendous amounts of erosion. There's hardly any fish diversity. There's no recreational access. There's no interaction between Plaster Creek and the residents of this watershed. I think it's an incredible loss to them. As the story unfolded and the story of Plaster Creek began to emerge, we started to notice a shift in our work from just cleaning up the creek, as important as that might be. So this photo is a picture taken in 2013, right after a major 100-year flood in Grand Rapids. And people came together to begin cleaning up trash in one section of the creek. Now, we know this is important to do, but over time, we began realizing if we really want to have lasting impact, you have to change people's relationship to the land and water, as well as their relationships to each other. We began to realize our work was more about fostering a transition away from neglect and apathy toward tending and keeping. We began to notice we were shifting from restoration ecology to reconciliation ecology. Reconciliation ecology is a science that is restoring, creating, and maintaining habitats and conserving biodiversity in the places where people live, work, worship, or play. And it invites us to reimagine better relationships. Human beings are fundamentally, this is another small quote from the book, human beings are fundamentally ecological and social creatures, and how we interact with one another will also influence the environment within which we exist. Broken relationships between people often result in degradation and damage to the earth because of the interconnection of all of life. So we began to realize that reconciliation ecology needs to focus not only on the damaged human creation or human nature relationship, but also on the damaged relationship between groups of people. Brokenness in all these relationships has resulted in the interconnected social and ecological problems we face today. Over time, we began to realize that an intentional reconciliation process was needed, and we looked to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa and the work of Desmond Tutu and others to learn about the process of reconciliation and to apply it to our work. Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission talks about 3 important steps of reconciliation. The first one is you have to recognize there's a problem. To begin practicing reconciliation ecology, we must first see and understand the problems. But second, and very important, is we need to acknowledge our complicity in the problems and lament our complicity. Sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's unconscious, but we often can contribute to the problems. And if we don't acknowledge our complicity in perpetuating the problems, we're not really ready to bring restoration and change. So first, we have to recognize the problem. Second, admit and lament our complicity in the problem. And then we are ready and poised, able to commit to the work of reparations and restoration, to work for a more hopeful future. So the book that we've written is organized in those 3 sections: recognizing a problem, admitting our complicity, and then fostering reparations and reconciliation. The story of reconciliation ecology in the Plaster Creek watershed starts with telling the truth. We cannot get to reconciliation in the future without confronting the reality of what has happened in the past. This is where Dave will take over.
So the first of these 3 steps in the reconciliation process that Gail just described is to recognize the problem. And to do that, in our situation, we really needed to focus on when the creek first started becoming contaminated. So to understand how and why Plaster Creek became so degraded, we had to take a look at the time when settlers first started showing up in West Michigan. Because ever since the glaciers left West Michigan, which was about 14,000 years ago, this creek was healthy and fine, and it supported all kinds of diverse life forms. And it was only in the last 150 to 200 years where its health started declining. So chapter 5 in our book, we dedicate a whole chapter to detailing some of the major worldview differences that arose when we had settlers first coming into contact in West Michigan with indigenous people who here in West Michigan are the Ottawa, part of the larger Anishinaabe group. And one of the contrasts that we explore in this chapter is the contrasts in religion and spirituality. Although often depicted as pagans and savages, indigenous North Americans, and certainly the Ottawa, were and still are a deeply spiritual people. In our book, we write, into this rich cultural and spiritual landscape of North America in the 1400s, European immigrants arrived with a decidedly different understanding of religion. And the most notable and damaging was their belief that the religious understanding of Europeans was superior to all others. This worldview premise was justified and framed by the doctrine of discovery that Pope Alexander VI laid out in his official 1493 declaration. Pope Alexander wrote that Christians who, quote unquote, discovered lands occupied by non-Christians have the right and the duty to take control of those lands, to advance the Christian religion. Pope Alexander elevated Christianity above all other religions and justified cultural genocide of non-Christian groups throughout the world. The doctrine of discovery was at the very heart of colonization, and its racist and ethnocentric views infiltrated North America as European immigrants settled in the United States. European settlers worked to conquer and dominate the land and its occupants because their identity of superiority over both had a religious basis. In doing the research for this book, the historical research, I was struck over and over again by how often the word improvement showed up in describing the role of the settlers, that to improve the land, they had to cut down the trees, which to me seems so ironic. And also to improve the people, they established boarding schools to give them the right, proper kind of education, which again, in my mind, was such a wrong thing to do. But improvement with a European flavor was kind of the battle cry of the day for the settlers here in West Michigan. Historical acknowledgement of the pain caused by theologies of entitlement and conquest is a critical step in addressing the brokenness among people groups, as well as the brokenness between peoples and the natural world. Now, in general, I kind of knew that Indigenous Americans were treated poorly. I grew up right here in West Michigan, and I went to lots of history classes in my grade school and high school upbringing and college. But I never really had a sense that those injustices happened right here in my place, and they're part of the history of this place that I call home. And I didn't really understand the intensity of these injustices until we really started looking at the history of this creek and what happened along its banks and in its watershed. There's one story in particular that we found in the archives of the Grand Rapids Public Library that has been especially heartbreaking. And I want to read that story, that part of the book where we tell this story. So in the 1830s, not long after the first missionaries had settled near the long-standing Ottawa village at the rapids of Owashtanong, which means faraway water, and today we know this as Grand River, which is the largest river in Michigan. One of the elders was a man named Makade Panesi, referred to as Chief Blackbird. Chief Blackbird was a skilled orator and strong leader, and he distrusted white people because of past interactions, including an incident when he had been abandoned on a remote island and left there to die by trappers, whom he thought were his friends. In 1926, Charles Belknap, who moved with his family to the Grand Rapids area in the mid-1800s, recorded his father's story about Chief Blackbird's resistance to evangelism. Chief Blackbird was unconvinced by the religious teachings that to learn about God, one must read about God in a book. The Ottawa experienced the Great Spirit by reading the natural world in which they lived. Chief Blackbird was also perplexed by the notion that to worship this God, one must move inside a building on one particular day each week. His people practiced spirituality constantly and ideally outdoors. These ideological differences led to an ongoing debate between the missionaries and Chief Blackbird. At one point, as the story goes, the Ottawa leader took one of the missionaries in his canoe down the Grand River to where Kenosha, water of the Walleye, emptied into Owashtonong, the Grand River. The two men paddled up the smaller creek for about 1 mile to a waterfall that cascaded over a rocky outcrop and poured into the wide Grand River floodplain. The milky orange-colored rock on this exposed west-facing cliff glowed in the late afternoon sun. It must have made for a spectacular scene in this gentle West Michigan landscape, which is dominated by rounded hills and gradual slopes. Chief Blackbird explained to the missionary that this was a special sacred space where his people encountered and worshiped the Great Spirit. The missionary collected a sample of the curious orange-colored rock and sent it to Detroit for analysis. The report came back that the rock was high-quality gypsum. In those days, Americans imported gypsum from as far away as Nova Scotia. Once ground into powder, it was spread onto farm fields as a fertilizer or used to make stucco and plaster for buildings. The first gypsum mine in the Grand Rapids area was established in 1841 at this very site. Eventually, there were 13 different gypsum mines along the Grand River. And this particular mine along Plaster Creek caused the loss of the sacred space for the Ottawa. The waterfall was destroyed. Mine tailings ran directly into the stream. The walleye stopped coming up the creek to spawn, and the creek's name was changed from Kenosha to Plaster. While I said that this story has been especially heartbreaking, it has also provided deep inspiration. Since Christians were involved with the degradation of this creek from the start, it only seems right that Christians should be among those working for its recovery. And in case you're not familiar with Calvin University, we're a faith-based school in the Reformed tradition of Christianity. So in the historical research we did for this book, I kept thinking about that Yad Jesse quote that Gail referenced earlier. Whose story are we missing? And it's difficult to find indigenous accounts of those early days because the Ottawa did not have a written language. Their history was oral, told in stories that were passed down. In our book, we write, an important part of telling the truth about West Michigan history is to rewrite the narrative of hostile, ignorant Indians and upright, intelligent pioneers. Historical records written by whites record time and time again the friendly and helpful initial interactions with which the indigenous people in West Michigan encountered the settlers. Violent encounters were rare, and among the Michigan Anishinaabe, most hostilities were fallout from coerced treaties, unfulfilled promises, dishonest dealings, and racial disrespect. Another part of telling the truth is to acknowledge that a people whose way of life respectfully fit into the land were replaced by a people who took whatever they wanted from the land. Vestiges of that settler colonist mindset are still with us today. And the current condition of our Plaster Creek is but one example of the careless way we continue to live in the land. So what is needed is a humble acknowledgement that indigenous ways of life hold important teachings that can guide us to live more sustainably and more carefully on the earth. So what was happening during this very interesting time in history is that we had a clash of two decidedly different worldviews. The worldview of the Ottawa had been informed by centuries of living in this landscape, while the contrasting colonial worldview had emerged from Enlightenment thinking in Europe. And we have learned through our work that past injustices that I've been describing based on racism are linked to current injustices that continue to play out in our watershed. Environmental injustice and environmental racism are present in the Plaster Creek watershed. both in the historic ways that indigenous people have been treated and currently because the downstream reaches of our watershed, where trash, toxins, and bacteria and floodwaters accumulate, tend to be populated by communities of color. All of this realization has led us to ask different types of questions than we began this work with when we were picking up trash from along the banks of Plaster Creek. So recognizing these connections, we now are asking questions like, how do we get watershed residents to care for each other? What we have seen is that when people in the upper part of the watershed, who tend to be white, suburbanites, or agricultural communities, when they get to know people from Hispanic communities, African American communities in the lower parts of the watershed, when they meet each other, they get to know each other, we see much more interest in change in behaviors that will have more of a positive effect on the creek. And then whose historical and practical knowledge do we trust? We have formed a partnership with Ron Yob, who is the chairman of the Grand River Bands of Ottawa Indians. And Ron was a reviewer for our book. And he works with our youth every summer. And he's just been a wonderful advocate and mentor for us in this work. We also ask whose voice is respected, whose voice is overlooked. We try to lead by listening to community members and gain from the knowledge that they have. And also, what information do we need to help bring significant change that's going to last for decades, if not longer? Whenever we have community events, we invite as many people as we can. We used to think about our job as being to clean up this creek so kids could play in it again. And now we know that that's far short of the goals we have as focusing on reconciliation and ecology. So we try to get people to come out and do the work. And in a work day like this, we have people talking to each other, getting to know each other. We also have them developing their own relationship with the creek and showing them how they can have a positive impact on that creek again. So reconciliation ecology is about changing people's relationship with each other, as well as changing the human relationship to the earth. I'd like to just end my comments here by showing you some pictures. David said that this is going to be a day where we're going to see some examples of hope, and that's part of our story. We have a lot of work to do yet, but we've seen some wonderfully hopeful signs along the way. So here are some of the restoration projects that we do. We've done a lot of work at churches in different with neighborhood communities, at schools, residences here at Calvin. We do work on our own campus. We know we need to get our own house in order if we're going to be trying to encourage other people. So this is a garden that we put in around a storm drain that takes stormwater runoff into the creek. It was surrounded by lawn. So we took the lawn out and then planted it with all native plants. So now the water, before it can go down that storm drain, has to make its way through all the dense roots of native plants that are sucking it up like straws. So a lot lower volume goes down that storm drain now, and the water that does make it down the storm drain is much cleaner than it was before. We have 14 different gardens like this on our campus now. So, and just to point out, I'm sure you realize this, but we have way more butterflies and birds on our campus now too. Here's a project we really have been delighted by. This is one we call our Asphalt to Ecosystem project, where we took part of a parking lot out. This corner of the parking lot here was funded by money from the State Department of Natural Resources. And now we take all that runoff, instead of putting it right down into the creek, we make it go through a big bioswale first. So here's our bioswale. And again, we plant it with native plants. We've created a native wetland meadow, and it supports all kinds of wonderful biodiversity. And these are some photos from there. We've done a lot of curb cut rain gardens with the city of Grand Rapids. We have over 160 of these now in the city, where the water that normally would go down the gutters of the streets into a storm drain gets diverted because we cut a section of the curb out. And then we redirect the water into a basin, like a miniature bioswale between the sidewalk and the street. And we plant those basins full of native plants, and they're processing the stormwater. So our goal here with these projects is to try to hold more water back on the land, have it percolate in, and then also fill our urban spaces with more native plants. welcoming back all sorts of different elements of biodiversity. The last project I'll show you is a floodplain restoration we did in the upper part of the watershed, started in 2019 at a place called Shadyside Park in Dutton. Here's Plaster Creek coming through the park, where all of the floodplain was cleared and Kentucky bluegrass was planted, which is not a good idea if you want to hold a stream bank, especially when it's receiving way too much stormwater runoff. And so you get all kinds of erosion going on here. Those stream banks there that you see the raw soil at are about 6 feet high. So we're losing a lot of earth here. But we came in with a grant from the state, and we're able to put in about a 6-acre floodplain where we peeled back the banks. We want the water to overflow into a floodplain. And so we make the banks shorter so it overflows more frequently. And then we plant that newly created floodplain full of native plants. Here's an aerial view from a drone shot. We didn't do anything to the contours of the main channel. Still meanders there. Put down some erosion control blanket. These are plants, and we grow these plants in our greenhouses at Calvin as part of our Plaster Creek Stewards work. So these are all native plants with local genotypes. And then we bring out the volunteers. And this is what the floodplain looked like when we were done. So much more biodiversity and much more stormwater gets absorbed by the floodplain, less goes downstream.
So in conclusion, what we want to encourage all of us to think about is that no matter where we come from, where we live, what our background is, what our vocation either is or has been, or what our life perspective is, each of us, even now, whether we're retired or still working, is able to live in ways that bring healing and hope. The doctrine of discovery has caused great harm throughout the United States, and we must face this and tell the truth about history, and we must lament our complicity and take responsibility for the harm that's been done. We have to be willing to tell the truth as we work hard for change. So I guess the thing we want to stress is that the beauty and tragedy of the Plaster Creek watershed is not unique to our place, but can be seen again and again in watersheds throughout the United States. What we are learning in the Plaster Creek watershed has implications that stretch far beyond West Michigan. By hearing the story of Plaster Creek, we hope you'll be inspired to address the plight of your own place. The story of Plaster Creek offers a microcosm of the story of life on Earth for us all. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very, very much, Dave and Gail. Congratulations on all you've accomplished in the watershed, and particularly the approach that you outlined here today, and that is quite different in some of its sensibilities from other restoration projects around the country. But this is really lovely. And again, we'll pick up with some questions. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to pick up with questions after we've heard from Tony David about one of the great ecological restoration projects that he headed up for the St. Regis Mohawk tribe and the Mohawk Nation. So Tony, over to you. Let's see if we can get your PowerPoint up there. Good, looking good so far.
Okay, sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay. You see the title slide? Oops.
See the title slide. We don't have the slideshow version on it, but I think this is fine. It's, as long as you can advance slides, I think we're good.
Good. Is that better?
That's great.
Okay. Okay. Hey. All right. Well, that's a tough act to follow, so I'll do my best. So thanks for everyone who's on, and thanks for the invitation. Just want to give a presentation on the decommission and removal of the Hogansburg Dam. Just realizing we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of this project, so still getting some interest in this a decade later, but the work nevertheless continues. So I'll just jump right in, and just a little bit of background. I'm the director of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division, and we are a federally recognized tribe up here in northern New York. And within the tribal government, the Environment Division has six regulatory programs, and we focus on various areas of. We're basically a natural resource department, and we have about more than 50 staff at the moment, divided between these 6 programs. And We have a growing solid waste transfer station, an agricultural program, and various other programs that work on our statutory authorities as a delegated entity and a sovereign Indian tribe. And just for geographical awareness, so this is a screenshot of the state of New York. And for those who don't know, the entire Great Lakes drain out via the St. Lawrence River, and the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne actually straddles the St. Lawrence River, and the territory itself is divided into by the border, and so there is a Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, which is a Canadian recognized First Nation, and then the St. Regis Mohawk tribe is the governing body for the southern portion. So I just want to point out a couple features here. The location of the Hogansburg Dam, which was the piece of infrastructure that I'll be talking about, but also want to tee up the discussion about the St. Regis River. So actually our location here is quite strategic. We're located at the confluence of several tributaries that feed into the St. Lawrence River, all with headwaters up in the Adirondacks. And if we zoom in on the St. Regis watershed itself, the areas that were reconnected with the St. Lawrence are highlighted in green, and the blue areas represent the stream reaches that are natural barriers, so heading up into the Adirondack Mountains. And the ones shaded in red are existing barriers that let's just call those future restoration efforts. And dialing in a little bit closer to the territory itself, so just showing the southern portion of Akwesasne. I want to mention that this project is located right in the heart of the territory, and central to our land claim. So we have a land dispute, which is currently reached a settlement with the state of New York and is actually in the Senate for ratification. So hopefully we'll have resolution of this long-standing land claim soon. But the project was right smack in the middle of this boundary dispute that we've had since the early 1800s. A good friend of mine, Mike Galvin, had this quote that really meant a lot to me. He talked about the importance of place names and indigenous language, because it really provides that connection to the resource, and also it can be a little bit of a time capsule on what the resources were like at the time. And in many respects, those names can go back hundreds of years. But when we talk about the history of New York and settlement of New York, most of that history is found here on the right-hand column. But prior to that, there was an existing rich history of names, of places, and resources. And so one of the towns that actually caught my attention was just upstream from us on the St. Regis River, a town that we know as Helena, but in the Mohawk language was Ohet Galukne, meaning the place of the salmon, right? And so Atlantic salmon have been long since extricated from Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River since the late 1800s. But that little bit of knowledge became an ecological restoration goal for me. And thinking about the potential to remove this first impassable barrier to fish on the St. Regis River, what that could mean for restoration for native species and river ecology. But if you look at all of these names, it's really about the resources, about the places, about the types of fish and the relationship with those resources. So it's really interesting to have that sort of historical context. And a little bit about the project, just a summary. This is a picture taken before the dam was removed, and it's a 250-foot long concrete spillway, a stop log gate section, and a powerhouse with an integrated intake. And the project was constructed in 1929. There were various versions of this that existed prior to this. Ice would frequently blow that out. That really a small, outdated facility only produced 485 kilowatts of generation. That was maximum generation and didn't actually achieve that. But I do want to call your attention to this stop lug gate section right here, because this became part of our decommissioning strategy. And there's a long historical record of the settlement of Hogansburg, the land speculator who was Hogan. And it really started this sort of like awakening within the community members as we started looking through all the history of the town and the settlement. And people started to ask this question, well, who is this Hogan guy anyway? And why is our town named after him? And it became, one of the turning points in getting the public behind this project is thinking about, if we could imagine what this resource would be like and what our relationship would be with the resource post Hogansburg Dam. And that became a source of pride for a lot of people here in the community. But you got to ask the question to begin with: why remove a dam? I mean, it's perfectly good dam. It's stable. It's not hurting anybody. Well, it's actually not true. Actually, several of our community members have died as they're swimming near this facility. But all waterways are public. They belong to all of us. And you, as the EPA, certainly know and understand the trust that we put into you in managing those resources. But there's an exchange. And that exchange is usually a net benefit to the public interest and public benefit. But as these facilities get old, a lot of times that benefit becomes out of balance. And these types of dams are what we call deadbeat dams, because they really aren't serving any purpose. They're just occupying a public waterway and contributing to the habitat fracturing and reducing river ecology. So this, through the study, which started out as a relicensing negotiation, quickly the facts aligned in support of exploring dam decommission and removal. We looked at a lot of the alternatives, and this is just a very simple summary of what those alternatives are. Of course, members of the public always ask, well, why can't you just cease power generation and walk away? Of course, that's prohibited by the Federal Power Act. But to relicense and operate this facility would require anywhere from $3.5 to $5 million. But the project was already losing $150,000 annually, so this was just not a very good, economics business model for this. And the best overall option at the time was a comprehensive removal. And of course, these are in 2016 dollars, so I'd have to adjust these for inflation. But we went through the process of examining all of the elements and feasibility for decommission and removal. We had a couple benefits of having, the bridge that crossed the river was probably one of the most studied bridges in North America, thanks to extensive work of the Army Corps. But we had a long and comprehensive list of studies that we wanted to develop to support and fully evaluate the dam removal. And we presented those to the public, and of course those were filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Some examples of the outcomes. This is we had to look at sediment analysis and do some grain size analysis. Work with some engineers to do modeling, sediment transport modeling. So this is showing representation of post-removal shear stress. So the stresses for lateral movement to downstream movement of sediments based on certain grain sizes. And as you can see, let's see, there's the location of the dam. Upstream of the dam, there were some isolated areas where we did expect sediments to move around, but for the most part, it was really negligible. And then downstream of the project, below the tail race, those levels are impacted by major hydropower dams on the St. Lawrence, so no change to the backwater there. So it gave us a level of confidence in moving forward, but just again, one example of types of studies that we conducted. Bathymetric surveys also coincide with the release of LiDAR data, which we were able to combine and create the total digital terrain model, which ultimately led to the creation of our first floodplain mapping, because FEMA had no authority on tribal lands. So we were able to use those to help improve our resilience and with our residential development and capital projects. But just to overview the timeline, this is very much simplified, but step one was to negotiate with the owner of the dam to return the project lands to the tribal control. And that took some doing. It was not necessarily an economic argument. It was more of a robustness with their investors that we had to satisfy those concerns. And then next we had to convince the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to for us to do the project. They had definitely had some concerns with the tribe and what would happen if we were to fail. They might be in an enforcement action against the tribe, and it's certainly something that they were very nervous about. The next step was to negotiate with the resource agencies any of the environmental requirements for permitting, so we didn't want to be surprised by any hidden costs. And then to go out and get all the permits and conduct the NEPA analysis. And actually, it was a bit of a source of pride for myself and our attorney, John Privatera, because the EA that we wrote was ultimately adopted by the FERC for public comment. So, and then you get to go, and after all that work, you get to go and actually do the deed, right? But a more robust timeline. So this is 7 intense years of my career. And to be completely honest, failure was at every corner, right? So at any given time, this project could have gone sideways, and it would have been wouldn't have proceeded. But nevertheless, I guess the stars were aligned in our favor, and we received notice to proceed from the Army Corps on a Friday afternoon, midsummer, and then by that Monday morning, the crews got to work. And this is the aerial view of the containment, and you'll notice that coffer dams were installed around the spillway, and that enabled us to prevent the offsite migration of dust and turbidity, and you can see the nice clear water flowing through. Note again that stop block gate section, and it's wide open in this picture, and I'll go to another. The reason why that's significant is because this only has a discharge capacity of about 2,000 cubic feet per second. Basically, any thunderstorm within the system would exceed that capacity, and the impoundment would refill, and the spillway would be overtopped, and we'd have to deal with the damages and trying to clean up. Fortunately, that never happened. It was a very dry summer, so good time for in-river work. And I have a little time-lapse video here just showing the removal of the cofferdam. So the concrete spillway is removed, disposed off-site, and you see them. This was mounted on another building. We just did use the trail camera with the time-lapse feature and put this together. But the crews worked into the night to pull that cofferdam out in one day. And I showed up the next morning, and you can see my orange jacket there on the catwalk. And I snapped this picture. And so what you're seeing is the first visible signs of the rapid section in this stretch of the river in 85 years. And to be honest, I had a concern because there was a 7 or 8 foot gain in elevation from the toe of the spillway up to the bridge piers, and we weren't sure. We weren't exactly sure about fish passability, that's a word, fish passage, but you could not design a more perfect fish passage structure with these gentle steps and pools. So phase 1 is success. Couldn't rest on our laurels. At that point, we need to move on and remobilize to phase 2, finish removing the concrete spillway, the stop block gate section, and ultimately armor the powerhouse to protect that against ice flows during the spring freshet. And that's what the project looked like by the first week of December. So really, intense few months of construction activities, ultimately done before winter set in. And I just want to mention a couple of the immediate improvements to water quality and habitat that we noticed. So this is downstream of the spillway. All of this rocky substrate is great spawning and nursery habitat for migratory fish. And during low flow events, the area would go anoxic, very warm, have struggled with excessive nutrients. But with the spillway gone, there's consistently flowing water through there, oxygenated water. So immediate improvements to this particular habitat. But now the fish had unfettered access to several miles upstream within the watershed. Our decommissioning strategy, we pulled the stop block gates early in the year. And so all of the banks within the impoundment had the benefits of the growing season. And this is just the natural native seed bank that was buried in the sediments that had a chance to germinate. So if there were areas that were struggling, we'd go back and use a little bit of seeding and mulching with the native species. But For the most part, this was all natural recovery. And the removal of the dam actually reduced flood risk upstream. So looking at different flood recurrence intervals, 50, 100, and 500 a year, and a 4 foot or more reduction of water surface elevation following the removal of the dam. And these benefits were very soon realized immediately after the removal of the dam during the spring freshet. So this is just a 9,000 cubic foot per second flow. But with the dam in place, the river would have overtopped its bank and flooded the parking lot of the St. Regis Mohawk School that you can see in the background. So immediately realizing those benefits of the removal. And so the Hogansburg Dam was located at River Mile 3. It was the first impassable barrier to fish on the St. Lawrence River, which connects to the river widening within the St. Lawrence called Lake St. Francis. So just a tremendous fishery. And with the removal of the dam, the Fish and Wildlife Service estimated over 500 river and stream miles were reconnected with the St. Lawrence. So just probably one of the most significant ecological restoration projects in the St. Lawrence Basin. And the blue areas indicate the natural barriers. So as you're heading up into the Adirondack, so those were existing natural barriers. But there's still several other small dams, perch culverts, or minor recreational dams that we could look at for future decommission or removal. And so just want to list off some of the accomplishments of the project. So, after more than 100 years, the control of the project lands were returned to the St. Regis Mohawk tribe for our management, and removal of the spillway, the drowning hazard, where some of our community members have unfortunately perished. But obviously, the major improvement here is the reconnection for migratory fish and extending their habitat up into very productive, very clean habitats up into the St. Regis River. So we're the first tribal nation within the United States to remove a licensed hydropower dam. And this was the first decommission and removal within the state of New York of an actively producing facility. So we're very proud of those accomplishments. And also the future work. There's still a lot, or even today, we're still doing a lot of restoration work within this watershed. For those who don't know, lake sturgeon is a state threatened species within the state of New York. And for the last 20 plus years, they've been stocking sturgeon above the dam. So now that the passage has been reconnected, we're doing acoustic telemetry to monitor the movements of those fish. And interestingly enough, the fish go out to the St. Lawrence and they come back into the St. Regis at various times. So it's really interesting to see their patterns, which have been reestablished. We don't know if they're spawning within the St. Regis River, but there's nothing to prevent them from not doing that. So we'll keep our ears and eyes peeled for that kind of activity. The bottom picture is a stocked Atlantic salmon smolt. So we had a partnership with the USGS. And I think that as EPA alumni, I think you can understand that the USGS has just been gutted. They're no longer able to help us with the production of Atlantic salmon. So we're looking at options to try to find other partners to continue this work. But there's been some successes and setbacks with establishing Atlantic salmon in the upper cold water streams. We just had not been able to document them returning to the St. Regis, even with the acoustic telemetry technology. But there's more work to be done on that front. But another one of the more recent developments is this presentation is not about the industrial history of the area, but as Walter knows quite well, we're immediately downstream from 3 Superfund hazardous waste facilities, and one of which being an NPL site, GM, that was GM owned before they went bankrupt, and the settlement of our natural resource damage assessment claim put aside some funding, and we're actually starting to tap into those funds now. So we're going to turn the former project lands of this from the dam into a park, and talk about reclaiming space and what this place will mean in the post Hogansburg Dam era. We're starting to call this Scunno Park or Peace Park. And for my part, like when we were right in the thick of things with this project, there was a gentleman who would come and watch the construction, right? And so one day I went over and I talked to him, and he expressed to me that he's an elderly gentleman and bad knees, and he said that when he would come and listen to the sound of the cascading water, he wouldn't have to take his pain medicine, right? So just the healing power of water. And I think that that's just like one example of many where we reconnect and to use the term from the previous presentation, reconcile our relationship with these waterways. People have spread their ashes in the rapids. People have had all sorts of ceremonies along these waters. So I think we're just beginning to realize, what the future could hold for this watershed, for this location. But we have this feature now right in our backyard. We don't have to get in the car and drive miles and miles and miles to see. We just right here. I can take my lunch and enjoy the sound, the smell, the sights right here in our backyard. So that's my last slide. So I'll stop there and just give you this is a picture of what the spring freshet looks like on the St. Regis River. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. This was again a very inspiring story of ecological and cultural restoration, and as you said, reconciliation. Um, I do actually have a question. There's none in the chat yet, but I've got a couple of them, and Dave Owen will probably have some for Gail and Dave. But let me start if I may. So you mentioned the funding from the natural resource damage claim against the GM for the GM Messina site, but this whole project must have been very expensive, and I'm curious as to how did the St. Regis Mohawk tribe fund that, or what were the sources of funding, and how much did it cost? I have no idea how much something like that costs.
Oh, yeah, good question. And I can't get into too many of the details about that, but what I
Fair
what I
enough.
can what I can say is that we established a private fund, a decommissioning fund, and the total construction costs were in 2016 dollars was about 1.5 million. Obviously, that'd be much more
Yeah.
expensive today. But we built in some contingencies too, assuming about a 35% contingency based on any of the unknowns that you would encounter. And ultimately we managed the project successfully. We had a really good engineering firm that we worked with. We hired a great GC, and we actually finished the project well under budget. So, it's just a testament to the rigor of our studies and trying to mitigate risk and developing our contingencies that just in case something did go wrong with the type of project like this. Sediment management is the biggest unknown, and we were able to do a lot of assessment and modeling to I guess give us the confidence moving ahead. But with any kind of environmental project, you never know what you're going to encounter.
And what was the incentive for the former owner to transfer the license to you and to basically say, okay, whatever investment they had in the dam is now gone? What was their incentive for that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they were looking at substantial losses if they were to have to relicense and operate the facility. But I think we took this as an approach of a partnership and looking to give them the confidence that that the tribe was taking the lead on the decommissioning, and that they were not. So we gave them a level of isolation from that because they didn't want to really be associated with having an asset that was in jeopardy. So once we worked around those parameters, the co-license agreement was forged between us and the previous owner, and that was ultimately something that the FERC would also accept because the FERC did not want them to just completely cut and run from their liabilities. So the co-licensing arrangement was satisfactory to all the parties.
Let me turn it over to Dave Ulrich and see if some questions for the other Dave and Gail.
Very good. Just a little reflection on Tony's presentation, which was excellent and very timely for not only the Plaster Creek area, which flows into the Grand River. They launched this summer. I had their first groundbreaking or water breaking on a dam removal on the Grand River that has been underway for, I don't know, 10, 15 years now. So they're venturing into that, and we may have them tap into your expertise for lessons learned or whatever. For Dave and Gail, and I asked this one before, and I'll see if I get the same answer this time, and that is whether or not by taking the reconciliation approach as opposed to what I will call the regulatory approach, do you feel that you've made more progress, the same or less progress over this almost 20-year period now that you've been at it?
Well, my initial response is working to change people's relationship with each other and with the land, rather than having it be a top-down kind of thing, having it be building relationships of trust and getting to know each other and wanting to work on issues of common cause that they care about, to get common concern. That enables more lasting change, I think. I mean, I know regulations are important, but I'm not sure that's the main motivation to get people to really take action. You want to add more to that, thing?
Yeah, I think also with a reconciliation approach, we're engaging way more people, right? With a regulatory approach, you're going after the polluters, the sources of the degradation, and making them pay for it. And you're not involving the broader community as much. So, yeah, I think reconciliation ecology has the capacity to create more lasting change, partly because you're involving way more people in that whole process.
I think you're also helping people realize that we are responsible for the way we live and how it impacts the people that are downstream from us, just like the people upstream from us impact us, so to speak. And so it creates a chance to build awareness and think about things that maybe we've treated as invisible in the past.
Well, very good. I agree completely. Now, I'm sure that over the years that you've worked on this, almost everything has gone perfectly, but just in case something might not have gone just exactly as you had hoped, are there some lessons learned, something you might do differently? And on the flip side of that, what you felt was particularly successful?
I would say one of the things that we did from the beginning that has been very successful is we've decided always to combine, when we do any kind of education or restoration activities, we always combine education and action together. So we don't just do some presentation typically about some aspect of watershed restoration without also then giving people who are there a chance to actually do something. So to go get their hands dirty, so to speak. And we wouldn't just do something, to work on plant native plants or trees or whatever, without first explaining why this matters and how it connects to a bigger vision and a bigger picture. And I think that combination of education and action has been really critical in helping get more people involved, because they feel like they're learning and doing something at the same time, and it's been really an effective strategy. So that's one thing I would say. Do you want to?
Yeah, I would add to that. That's definitely right on. But also, as I quickly mentioned at one point, try to lead by listening. Go into communities with your ears wide open. And I encourage our staff, when you're in community meetings, make sure you're not the person who's saying the most words there, right? That there's a lot of expertise in the community. Sometimes they don't even know that they're the ones who have the information that's most valuable. So really trying to lift up people who oftentimes are not paid attention to. And in that way too, then they feel affirmed and they're much more likely to become involved. So leading by listening is a really important lesson we've learned.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. And I see we have a question from Michelle Wilson. Michelle?
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for both presentations. Very, very interesting. I was involved in the tribal program in RECRA at headquarters. I retired in 2018. and we did work with St. Regis Mohawk and other tribes who were doing RECRA related projects. And I wanted to ask the gentleman who managed that program, the dam program, how EPA and the other partners worked with the spiritual needs of the people of the tribe. That was one thing that was always important to me and my staff. But also, we realized pretty early on that we were pretty ignorant about the different spiritual practices of the different tribes. And if you have any thoughts about number one, how the agencies worked with you, and number two, the spiritual significance of the work, I would be really interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
Great questions. So, I mean, one of the things that I've heard from staff members here, because we're primarily we're 80% tribal employment within the organization, and within the environment division, we're probably very similar to that. But one of the things that I've heard from my colleagues over the years is that this is more than just a job. It's a calling, and for us, this is our homeland. And even though we're directly adjacent to Superfund hazardous waste sites, we're not going anywhere, right? So we have a sense of permanence here, and I think that the second part of your question is it gets to like the core of what we do, as in tribal governments, and that is give us the opportunity to lead, give us the opportunity to make those decisions. And this is, I think that one of the great outcomes of this project is we've paved the way for other tribes to take the lead on decommissioning dams that impact their tribal lands or their Aboriginal territory. And really, the sky's the limit. And what I think gave what we were so unique in that we, as a tribal government, we were able to go between the resource agencies and negotiate and develop creative solutions that, frankly, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service couldn't do. And that's because of our unique status and our unique relationship with the land. And so a lot of times I think it's working with tribal nations to let them make those decisions, but also to fumble through it too, because we're not going to get it right the first time. We may fail, but we also want to learn from those experiences, because it's not going to be perfect. And I'm not going to say that the Environment Division does everything perfectly. Certainly, we hit road bumps along the way, but I think this is just an example where partnership really helped, and the strength of this outcome was based on the strength of those partnerships, and EPA played a big role in that.
Thank you
Right.
very much. I would just encourage you to spread that knowledge to those of us in the government who don't come from that indigenous background, but who want to do a good job. We just don't know how. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'll just interject that back when I was at EPA, and we would meet on a regular basis with St. Regis Mohawk and the other members of the Haudenosaunee Confederation, which many of you in the audience probably know as the Iroquois nations. The meetings always started with what they call the words that come before all others, which is my word, not theirs, a sort of a prayer about the relationship with nature, which was always very instructive, actually. So that was the kind of instruction that Michelle, you're talking about, is that we were also being taught when we had that interaction. But I wanted to ask Tony, so you're surrounded by the United States, by New York State, by the white population there. What kind of reactions have your neighbors there had to this effort to restore the St. Regis River? Because it goes way outside your territory. The benefits or the impacts go way, as you pointed out in the map, go way far upstream into the Adirondacks.
I think the fishing report is where we got the most positive feedback, because people are catching migratory fish in parts of the river that they just frankly weren't there before, in numbers or in size. Once we reconnected these two major watersheds, there's so much synergy, but also just reconnecting with new genetic material. It's leading to more robust populations. And I mean, right now, the walleye fishing has never been better on the St. Lawrence. And I think that's a testament to just removing the barriers and let the fish do what they're programmed to do. Now, instead of just a couple acres of that small spawning habitat below the tail race, they can go up 10, 12, 15 miles where they can find all sorts of productive habitat and spread it around, right? So you're not just putting all of that spawn on the success of it on one small spawning bed, but it's scattered across several spawning beds. You're really spreading that your chances for success. So people tell me that they're catching all sorts of big fish way up in the system that they never experienced before. And some of the tough challenges that we had dealing with the fear and uncertainty related to sediments, but also ice jam movements. And we actually contracted with some internationally renowned ice experts from Clarkson University to do some studies in ice modeling. And lo and behold, the Hogansburg Dam didn't actually mitigate risk or ice jam risk. It actually just it appeared to, so it kind of masked that risk to us. So we were able to present those results to the community, and it's like, okay, we need to take a harder look at resilience planning and all of that stuff. But yeah, just a lot of positive outcomes, and but I think the fishing report is one of the best.
Well, I'm intrigued to hear that you said the walleye are coming back, and let me turn over to Gail and Dave. So I can't remember the name that you said, the indigenous name for the creek, but it was about walleye. Is that right?
And O'Shea.
And O'Shea. And are any walleye able to come back yet now into your watershed, or is that still
Not
something
yet.
to look for in the future?
We are looking and we're watching very carefully. Plaster Creek has been used as a statewide monitoring station for suckers, and we've been delighted that so many suckers have been found in Plaster Creek. And also, we've been monitoring our mussels, freshwater mussels, and there too, some surprising finds have shown up. So, and just this summer, we had a community call to ask us what to do with the beavers that have moved in, and so. We've got a lot of very hopeful signs that are showing up, but to date, no one has seen a walleye yet. We know they're in the Grand River, and we're just waiting for that day. And then we really are hoping to turn the name back to Ken O'Shea again. We would really like to free ourselves from this name of Plaster, but we don't want to do it prematurely.
No, that'd be great, though. I assume there's no more gypsum mining going on. That's
Right.
a matter of the past? Are there
That's-
other industrial sources of pollution? I mean, you talked a lot about the runoff and and all the extraordinarily good things that you're doing to sort of reduce runoff and let the natural systems clean the water that runs off. But are there still industrial discharges as well, or is that mostly not the case?
Mostly not the case.
No.
There may be some
Illegal ones, maybe.
illegal ones
Yeah.
that are still hooked up. We have our suspicions, but most of the point source contamination has been checked.
That's
We have a
good.
couple of Superfund sites, but so yeah, it's almost all non-point source pollution now that we're really focused
it.
on.
Well, Tony highlighted the importance of names, and I've kind of pushed Dave Warner's a little bit on, going with the renaming. I just have real trouble saying Plaster Creek, but I respect that you got to wait until the walleye come back. But I want you to promise that as soon as you spot them, that
Yeah.
the rest of us know, and there will be an appropriate celebration.
I
Okay.
definitely promise.
You
No
heard it
problem
here.
with that
There,
one,
there will be a big celebration when that
Dave. Oh,
happens.
yeah.
Okay,
Well,
good, good. Maybe taking the dam out on the Grand River will, make them
who knows?
more active and desirous of going up the creek.
Yeah.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank all three of our speakers, and these really were inspiring stories, and we need some good news stories to inspire us to go forward right now. So let me ask our audience to join me in thanking our speakers, and congratulations to the great work you're all doing. Tony, it was wonderful to see you again. Gail and Dave, it was great to meet you. And we're going to let you get back to your very, very busy lives. And for those of the audience members who are still on the line here, you're welcome to stay on for a few minutes. We usually invite folks to do that and chat with your colleagues, your former colleagues and your friends and so forth. But I do want to thank our speakers, and it was great
Thank
to
you.
have these presentations.
Thank you all too.
Yeah,
Thanks very, very much.
thanks very much.
Great
Yeah,
to see
thanks
you.
for the invitation. And Walter, if you get a chance, I think Eric Schaff was on, but I don't see him anymore. If you just say hi to him for me, I
I will do
appreciate
that.
that.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Thanks.
He is, by the way, now a grandfather. So there you go.
Ah.
I'll share the greetings. And
Great. Thanks.
yeah, and so we hope that those who are still on the line, we hope you'll join us again for our next Academy program, which is going to be on September 29th. We're taking the summer off. That September program is going to be titled New Nukes or No Nukes. And we're going to hear about where America may or may not be headed with respect to nuclear energy, and whether there's a resurgence of that, and if so, in what form. But as I said, we invite our attendees who may wish to do so to stay on the Zoom for a few more minutes to chat with one another about this program or anything else that may be on your mind these days. I'm afraid there's plenty to have on our minds, but if you've also got something better to do, you're welcome to say goodbye now and get back to your lives.